The sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting golden patterns across the old oak floor. I sat on the edge of my bed, folding clothes into my worn brown suitcase. The room smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet I kept in my drawer. Howard used to say it reminded him of our honeymoon. Every June for the past 4 years, my children and I had made the same trip to Lake Tahoe, a cozy cabin overlooking the water, a fire pit for marshmallows, crickets singing at night. It started as a tradition when Howard was still alive, and I insisted we keep it going after he passed. I told myself it kept us together, that even if our lives had drifted apart, a week in the mountains would patch us back up again. I reached for my old blue swimsuit, the same one I wore every year. My fingers paused when I felt a tiny hole along the hem. I held it up to the light. Just a pin-sized tear, but it pierced something deeper. That suit wasn't just cloth, it was memory. It was the last one we'd picked out together, Howard and I, on a spontaneous trip to the coast. He'd teased me in the store, saying the color matched my eyes when I was annoyed. Fletcher, my son, used to laugh at how I always brought the same things. "Mom, you can afford a new one," he said last year, grinning as he unloaded groceries into the Tahoe kitchen. "You don't have to act like you're still broke." But he never understood. It wasn't thrift, it was sentiment. Some things you keep because they hold time. I glanced at the photo on my dresser. Lake Tahoe, 5 years ago. Howard's arm was around my shoulder, his face creased with sun and laughter. Fletcher and Brooke, my daughter, stood beside me, both of them, with their arms slung around their own spouses. The grandkids were somewhere in the background, blurry and in motion. A rare moment where everyone was in one place, happy, together. I carefully placed the swimsuit in the suitcase, even with the hole. Then added my blood pressure pills, my arthritis cream, and the novel I planned to read by the lake. I loved sitting on the veranda, sipping tea, watching the children splash around, and listening to the distant sizzle of the barbecue. At 67, I no longer jumped into the lake or raced the grandkids through pine trees, but I watched. I was present, and I believed that still mattered. The clock in the living room chimed 3. The kids would be arriving soon for our traditional pre-trip dinner. I had spent the entire day in the kitchen, preparing Fletcher's favorite meat casserole and Brooke's beloved blueberry pie. I even set the table with the fancy plates china with little green leaves around the rim. The table looked like Christmas morning, even though it was just June. By 4:30, the front door swung open. "Hi, Mom," Fletcher called, walking in without waiting for an answer. He pecked my cheek and made a beeline for the casserole. I can smell it from the porch." "It's your favorite," I said, smiling. "You know the doctor told me to stay off fat," he added, patting his rounded belly. "But tonight, I'll make an exception." Then came Veronica, tall, slender, ice cold. She walked in still wearing sunglasses and didn't say a word until she was halfway to the armchair. "Where are the kids?" I asked, trying to hide the disappointment in my voice. "Babysitter," she said, her thumbs glued to her phone. "Aiden has soccer. Emma's at a party." Fletcher didn't even glance up from the food. 15 minutes later, Brooke arrived, flushed and apologetic. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Traffic was awful," she said, kissing my cheek. "The important thing is you're here," I replied warmly. Behind her was Nate, her husband, a large man with an even larger beard. He gave me a polite nod and headed straight for Fletcher. I scanned the hallway, the twins. At Nate's mom's, Brooke said, "Lucas has a rash, just in case. So no grandkids, again." I tried not to show it. I arranged the last dish avocado salad and invited everyone to the table. Fletcher piled his plate high. Veronica picked at her salad like it might attack her. "No dressing," she said sharply. "I'm on a cleanse." She never called me Mom, just Martha, like she was reading a label on a soup can. Midway through dinner, Fletcher cleared his throat. "We wanted to talk to you about the Tahoe trip." My ears perked. "Yes, I've been packing. Are we renting the same cabin again?" Brooke and Fletcher exchanged a glance. It was a half-second flicker, but I felt it in my chest like a slap. "We decided to go with a slightly different group this year," Brooke said gently, setting down her fork. "A different group. You remember Charles, my co-worker Fletcher interjected. He and his family are coming. We rented a smaller cabin," Brooke added. "Fewer rooms, less space." What Fletcher's trying to say is, there's no room for you this year. The fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. The ticking of the wall clock filled the silence like a countdown. You're not taking me. Fletcher looked down at his casserole. We thought you'd be more comfortable here. Less noise. You said you had headaches last year. And at your age, Brooke chimed in. These kinds of trips can be exhausting. At my age, I stared at their faces so familiar and suddenly foreign. Had I become invisible a burden? I understand, I whispered, reaching for my water glass to cover the tremble in my hand. You'll have more fun with your peers. Brooke touched my arm. You're not offended, right? No, of course not. They smiled, visibly relieved, as if dodging a bomb they had planted themselves. The conversation shifted. Movies, work, Fletcher's promotion. I nodded and smiled, but something inside me shifted. It wasn't the trip I mourned. It was the way I was so easily removed, cut out, dismissed. Later, after they'd left, I stood in the quiet kitchen wrapping up leftovers no one had touched. I noticed some papers on the edge of the table, Fletcher's, I assumed. I picked them up to move them to the desk. That's when I saw it. My address, the word sale, a preliminary contract. I sat down slowly. My house, my home, they were selling it. Without me, I don't know how long I sat there staring at the papers. The edges dug into my fingertips, but I didn't move. The living room buzzed faintly, with the old wall clocks ticking. Its rhythm felt too loud, too fast, like my heart, which had started pounding the moment I saw my address printed neatly at the top of the page. 17 Maple Street, that was my home, and under it in legalese I could barely decipher were the terms of its sale. I blinked hard, willing myself to read. There were words like transfer of ownership mortgage agreement estimated closing vacate date. Then the number, $395,000. A fair price, maybe even low. Beneath it, two familiar names, Fletcher Teddington and Brooke Andrews. And under buyer a name I didn't know at all. My hands trembled as I set the contract down. The casserole still sat on the stovetop untouched. The blueberry pie remained whole, its crust still glistening from the egg wash I'd brushed on only hours earlier. I'd baked it for Brooke, but she hadn't even glanced at it. They didn't come for the food. They didn't come for me. They came because they needed to pretend for one last time that we were still a family. I stood and walked slowly through the living room, past the photographs on the wall. There we were, Brooke's graduation day, Fletcher's wedding, Christmas mornings from years ago, wrapping paper everywhere. Howard with his coffee and sleepy eyes smiling like he didn't mind the mess. And now they were selling the house while I packed for a trip I'd just been uninvited from. A distraction, I realized. A convenient excuse to get me out of the way. They didn't want me in Tahoe. They wanted me gone. I pressed my palm against my mouth and held it there, hoping the pressure would stop the tears from falling. It didn't. I slept in my chair that night, a blanket tossed over my shoulders, the sale documents folded neatly on the table beside me. I didn't have the strength to climb the stairs. By morning, my decision was made. Not out of revenge, not even out of anger, though God knows I had enough of both. No. This was about dignity, about refusing to be treated like luggage to be stowed away while the important people made their plans. I was still here, I was still alive, and I wasn't leaving my home without a fight. That afternoon I called Sheldon Hayes. He had been our family lawyer for over 30 years. Howard trusted him. I trusted him. And although I hadn't spoken to him since Howard's will was finalized, I remembered his kindness. The way he'd offered me tissues in his office while I signed papers with shaking hands, widowed and overwhelmed. Sheldon Hayes' law office came a young voice on the line. Hello, this is Martha Teddington. I need to speak with Mr. Hayes regarding an urgent legal matter. Just one moment, Mrs. Teddington. As I waited, I stared out the kitchen window. The hydrangeas were in bloom again. Howard had planted them 20 years ago, convinced they'd bring a softness to the yard. When Sheldon finally picked up, his voice was older, raspier than I remembered, but still kind. Martha, he said, surprised. It's been a while. Yes, I replied quietly. And I wish I were calling for a happier reason. I told him everything. The trip. The dinner. The way they'd gently, politely, coldly excluded me. And finally, the documents I found on my kitchen table, left behind carelessly, by a son too eager to move on. Sheldon listened without interruption. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "Let me see what I can find. Do you still have a copy of the deed transfer from 5 years ago?" "I do. Howard and I signed it just after he passed. It was your office that handled it." "Yes, I remember now. We arranged a life estate for you, meaning they could own the house, but you'd have the right to live in it for as long as you're alive." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "But if they sell it, they can't evict you, but you'd be living in your home with strangers." The thought made my stomach clench. "So what are my options?" "There might be one," he said slowly. "I'll need to read the original documents again. But Howard, he was always very thorough. I seem to recall he wanted something included, something to protect you, protect me. Even from the grave, he was still watching over me." That night, I pulled out the old paperwork. It took me hours. Howard had kept everything in labeled folders. Taxes, health insurance, home repairs. I finally found the right one in a file labeled real estate. Inside, copies of the deed transfer, notarized signatures, and a faint yellow post-it in Howard's handwriting, check clause 3. Sheldon added it. Clause 3. I reread it 3 times before I understood. If the beneficiaries Fletcher and Brooke attempted to sell the house without my consent, I had the right to reclaim full ownership at the market value at the time of transfer, not the current price. 5 years ago, the house had been worth $280,000. They were now selling it for nearly $400,000. If I exercised my right, I could buy it back from them at the lower value, then sell it myself. A profit, a path, a way out. My pulse quickened. My mind raced. Was it legal? Was it moral? Was it possible? Yes, I told myself, because it wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming myself. Reclaiming the woman who had once fought through morning sickness to get her teaching license, who sat up late grading papers after putting kids to bed, who nursed Howard through chemo and still found time to bake birthday cakes from scratch. That woman wasn't gone. She'd just been quiet, waiting for a reason to rise. The next morning, I returned to Sheldon's office, dressed in my best navy dress and a blazer with pearl buttons. Not to impress, but to remind myself who I was. As I stepped inside, he stood from behind his old oak desk holding out his hand. "Martha," he said warmly, "you look ready for battle." I smiled thin and sharp. "I am." Sheldon sat back in his leather chair and opened the folder I'd handed him. His office still looked the same dark wood shelves, lined with dusty legal volumes, a brass desk lamp, casting a golden glow, and the same ceramic mug he'd always used with the chipped lip and the words, "Best Grandpa Ever." For a long while, he said nothing. Just flipped through the pages, making the occasional grunt, scribbling a note or two in his slanted handwriting. I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap nails, digging into the soft flesh of my palms. I tried not to let my nervousness show, but the weight of everything, the betrayal, the shock, the looming unknown, had settled into my spine like cold stone. Finally, he looked up and pushed his glasses higher on the bridge of his nose. "Martha," he said slowly, "Howard was a smart man." Tears stung my eyes at the sound of his name spoken with such certainty. "Yes," I whispered. "He was." Sheldon tapped the document. "This clause, clause 3, is your safeguard. It gives you legal grounds to reclaim the property if your children attempt to sell it without your written, informed consent. Since they've already drafted a sale agreement and made plans to transfer ownership while you're conveniently out of town, that's a clear violation." I exhaled, half relief, half disbelief. "So what happens now?" He leaned forward. "We file a formal notice of repossession. You offer to buy back the house from your children at the market rate from 5 years ago, $280,000. Then, as soon as it's legally in your name again, you can sell it for whatever the current market will bear. And I keep the difference." He nodded. "Minus any fees. But yes, it'll be yours. They can't stop you, not legally." A wave of emotion surged in my chest, part vengeance, part heartbreak, part vindication. I'd never imagined I would be sitting here plotting a legal counterattack against the children I raised. But I wasn't the one who turned this into a war. They had. "When can we begin?" I asked, already hearing the steel returning to my voice. "I'll draw up the paperwork today," Sheldon said. We'll file the notice with the city and send formal letters to Fletcher and Brooke. They'll be legally obligated to halt the sale. What if they try to contest it? They won't win, he said flatly. This clause is ironclad. Your husband made sure of it. I nodded and rose from my chair. Then let's move forward. Sheldon stood with me. One more thing, Martha. Once you regain ownership, what will you do with the house? I stared at him. Then I smiled for the first time in days. A real smile. I'll sell it, and I'll start over. Back home, I moved through the house like a woman on a mission. No more tears, no more nostalgia, just clarity. I went room by room, opening windows, letting in the early summer breeze. I washed the curtains, polished the floors, and boxed up the clutter I no longer needed. I didn't want to leave behind a mess for anyone, not for me, not for the future. I called a discreet real estate agency I found online, one that specialized in fast private transactions. The owner, Audrey Peake, was a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a confidence that calmed me. I told her I wanted the sale handled discreetly. I don't want my children to know until it's done. She didn't flinch. I understand. We've handled cases like this before. We'll be careful. She walked through the house with me, taking notes, snapping pictures, gently suggesting updates, fresh paint decluttering fresh flowers on the mantel. This home has heart, she said as we stood in the living room, sunlight streaming in through the bay window. People feel that. They want that. I looked around and saw what she meant. The walls bore the fingerprints of my children's childhoods. The staircase held echoes of Christmas mornings of Howard carrying Brooke down after she fell asleep under the tree. The kitchen, my sanctuary for decades, still smelled faintly of vanilla and basil. I'd loved this house, every inch of it, but it no longer loved me back. It was time to let go. That night I went to the attic. It had been years since I climbed those narrow wooden steps. The air was thick with dust and memory. I brought a flashlight and a cup of chamomile tea. My hands shook as I opened boxes labeled Brooke's School Projects, Fletcher's Trophies, Christmas Ornaments. Inside, I found the years I'd given away. The nights I stayed up sewing Halloween costumes. The report cards I'd proudly pinned on the fridge. The drawings that once said, "I love you, Mommy." I sat down on a faded beanbag and cried, not out of grief, but for the woman I had been, and the woman I was about to become. In the very last box, I found something unexpected, a letter from Howard. Tucked in a yellowing envelope addressed in his familiar looping script for Martha one day. My breath caught as I opened it. The ink was slightly faded, but the words were his. Steady, loving, Martha. If you're reading this, it means something hard has happened, and I'm not there to help you through it, but I want you to know I've always believed in you, in your strength, in your kindness. If our kids ever forget who you are, I hope you remember. You don't owe them your silence. You owe yourself your life. Howard. I clutched the letter to my chest and sobbed loud and long, like a wave breaking. Then I stood, wiped my tears, and carefully placed the letter in my purse. Howard had left me more than memories. He'd left me a compass, and I was finally ready to follow it. 3 days later, the house went on the market. Audrey listed it privately to a short list of buyers. She said the current demand in the area was high and rising. We had no doubt we'd find a buyer quickly. Meanwhile, I gathered the savings Howard and I had set aside. There was his life insurance payout still largely untouched, my teacher's pension, a few old investments I'd never really understood but had let grow. Altogether, it was enough to buy the house back and maybe even begin again. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't answer calls from Brooke or Fletcher, though they were rare anyway. They were too busy packing for Lake Tahoe, too busy sharing vacation plans on Facebook, too busy for me. Good. Let them be distracted. They wouldn't know what had happened until it was already done. And when they returned to a letter on the kitchen table, instead of their plans neatly laid out, they'd realize what they'd underestimated. Their mother wasn't just a caretaker, a cook, a background figure in their lives. She was a woman, and she had decided to fight back. I woke before sunrise the next day without the help of an alarm clock. My body was buzzing with nervous energy, part fear, part resolve. Downstairs, I made my usual cup of chamomile tea and sipped it slowly at the kitchen table. The sunlight hadn't yet touched the garden, but the hydrangeas were glowing in the blue morning haze. I used to sit in that very spot with Howard on slow Sundays, planning the week ahead or reading the paper. Now that table was covered in legal documents, real estate brochures, sticky notes, and a folded letter written by a dead man who somehow knew I'd need his voice to keep going. The house smelled different now, not of bread or lilacs or pine cleaner. It smelled of endings. I went to the desk drawer and pulled out the file folder where I kept all the documents Sheldon had finalized for me. My declaration of repossession, the notarized letter informing Fletcher and Brooke of my legal right to reacquire the property, and a printed check for $280,000 made out to Fletcher Teddington and Brooke Andrews. It felt strange offering to buy back the home I had already given them. I remembered that day so clearly 5 years ago in Sheldon's office, when I signed the deed transfer. Howard had just passed. I was dazed, hollowed out, and overwhelmed by decisions. Fletcher had gently nudged me into making things easier down the line. Brooke had cried. They both said, "Mom, it's still your house, you'll always live here." Now I knew that's what children say when they're thinking about inheritance, but not about love. Howard, thank God, had seen it coming. I hadn't. I folded the check and tucked it into an envelope. My hand trembled slightly, not from age but from fury wrapped in heartbreak. By the end of the week, Audrey had already scheduled 3 private showings. We agreed not to list the house publicly just yet. Everything needed to move quickly and quietly. The first couple that came through, young, sweet, hopeful, looked at the living room like it was sacred. The woman ran her fingers over the fireplace mantel. "It feels warm," she whispered, "like a family really lived here." They asked a few polite questions, but admitted in the end that the price was out of their reach. The second visitor, a slick bachelor with sunglasses perched atop his head, made an offer $50,000 below asking. "No," I said gently but firmly. "This house deserves more." Audrey looked at me over her clipboard. "Are you sure, Martha, you might not get another offer that fast?" "I am," I said without blinking. "I'm not desperate, just determined." And I meant it. That evening, as I finished packing the last of the items I wanted to keep, I opened a wooden jewelry box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were old earrings, my wedding ring, and a single folded letter from Howard again. This one I'd kept from the summer before he got sick. It was short, just a sketch of a dream he'd written on hotel stationery while we were on vacation in Carmel. "When I retire, let's go to Italy. We'll sit in a little cafe in Tuscany, you with your sketchbook, me with a book. No plans, just the 2 of us. We never made it. Life got in the way. Cancer got in the way. But now, with the sale of this house, maybe I still could. Not we, but me." The idea started as a whisper in my mind and quickly grew louder. Maybe I wouldn't just start over in a new apartment down the street. Maybe I'd go further. Maybe I'd go to Tuscany. 1 week later, Audrey brought me a new buyer. Her name was Mrs. Wentworth, mid-50s, recently divorced, 2 grown sons. Her eyes were kind but tired, like someone who'd just cried for an entire season and was trying to learn how to smile again. "I want to start over," she told me as we walked through the master bedroom. "No memories of my ex, no ghosts, just a new chapter." I liked her instantly. As we sat in the garden, she looked around and sighed. "This feels like the kind of place I could heal." When Audrey called me the next morning, her voice was bright. "She's offering full price," she said, "and she's ready to close immediately." I said yes. No hesitation, no turning back. I wired the $280,000 tons to Fletcher and Brooke's joint account that very afternoon, labeled only repossession settlement. Then I signed the paperwork, transferring the house back to my name. 48 hours later, I sold it to Mrs. Wentworth for $420,000. The difference, minus Audrey's commission and taxes, was mine. It was done. As the final signatures were stamped and the escrow settled, I sat in the now empty living room, surrounded by the last few boxes of what I planned to keep. I looked around at the space where we'd built our life, Howard and I, where I raised 2 children, where I cooked hundreds of meals, gave hundreds of kisses, fought hundreds of quiet battles. This house had carried all of it. But now, I was done carrying the weight of it. I'd bought back my freedom, literally, and they didn't even know yet. Fletcher and Brooke were still in Tahoe. I saw their photos on Facebook smiling by the lake, kids holding marshmallows on sticks. Veronica wearing a wide-brimmed hat and zero warmth in her eyes. They had no idea the house was no longer theirs. They had no idea that their mother wasn't theirs either. On the last morning, as I prepared to leave, I wrote a letter, one for each of them. I placed them in envelopes, then set them side by side on the kitchen counter. Dear Fletcher and Brooke, I found the papers. I know what you planned, and I chose to respond not with tears but with action. The house is sold, the money is mine. The documents are all legal. Sheldon will confirm that. I am not angry, but I am awake. This is not revenge, this is reclamation. I hope one day you'll understand. Mom. I closed the front door behind me for the last time and did not look back. As the moving truck pulled away, and I followed behind it in my car, I realized something I hadn't dared say out loud. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving behind the version of me they expected. The compliant mother, the silent widow, the background character. That woman was gone. And the one replacing her, she had a passport, a plan, and a one-way ticket to Italy. The wheels touched down at Fiumicino Airport just after dawn. I peered out the small airplane window, my forehead nearly brushing the cool glass. The sky outside was soft with pink streaks, and the city of Rome, so ancient, so alive, waited in the distance like a secret I was finally allowed to keep. Italy, the place Howard and I had whispered about for decades. A fantasy we'd shelved every year in favor of tuition payments, leaky roofs, unexpected medical bills, and the never-ending rhythm of family obligations. And now I was here, alone, at 67, not as someone's mother, not as someone's wife, just Martha. The customs line was long, but I didn't mind. It gave me time to soak it in, the foreignness, the freshness. Everyone around me seemed in a rush, men with briefcases barking into phones, young backpackers, buzzing with caffeine and wanderlust. I stood still, heart pounding, soaking up every detail like a dry sponge. After retrieving my luggage, 2 modest suitcases, 1 backpack, I stepped outside into the Roman air. It hit me instantly, not just the temperature, but the scent. Olives, salt, a faint clean floral. I breathed in deeply. I'd made it. I checked into a small hotel, nestled off a cobblestone alley in Trastevere, not far from Piazza Navona. My room was small, charming, and opened onto a tiny balcony wrapped in flowering vines. The walls were warm cream with dark wooden beams, and the bed had a hand-stitched quilt that reminded me of the ones my mother used to make. That first day, I allowed myself to be a tourist. I wandered the old streets, stopped for espresso in tiny cafes, stared at fountains and ruins as if they were friends I hadn't seen in years. I visited the Vatican, tossed a coin into the Trevi fountain, climbed to the dome of St. Peter's, ignoring the protests of my knees. I wasn't trying to check off a list. I was trying to feel. And slowly, the numbness that had lived in my bones for so long started to thaw. On my 5th morning, while sipping cappuccino in a sun-dappled square near Campo de' Fiori, my phone rang. I nearly didn't answer. But the name flashing on the screen stopped me, Fletcher. My hand trembled slightly as I brought the phone to my ear. Hello? There was a pause, then his voice angry and bewildered. Mom. What the hell is going on? I glanced around at the scene in front of me, tourists, laughing, a violinist tuning his instrument, pigeons pecking at crumbs. I was expecting your call, I said calmly. We got home yesterday, he snapped. The house is empty. Empty, and there's some woman named Wentworth living in it who says she bought it from you. What is going on? I sipped my cappuccino. I left you a letter, on the kitchen counter. We saw the letter, he said, his voice rising. It makes no sense. Some crap about repossession and contracts and Sheldon. And how could you do this? The same way you were going to sell my home behind my back, I said, not raising my voice, but each word crisp and steady. Only I did it first, and legally. He was silent for a moment. You were going to be on a trip, he said weakly. I was never meant to be included on that trip, I said. That was the point, wasn't it? You wanted me out of the house long enough to push the papers through, but you left them on the table. And I read them. Mom, he said, switching tones, you're tired. You're confused. You shouldn't be handling things like this alone. I mean, you're in another country. I'm in Italy, I said, living a life I dreamed of for years. And I'm not confused. I'm awake. He exhaled heavily. You used Dad's claws, didn't you? Yes, I said. He protected me, even after he was gone. But that money, Mom, that's the family's money. It's our legacy, the house. It was my home, I interrupted, my voice finally sharpening. The one I gave you in trust. You violated that trust. So now the house is gone. The money is mine. And your legacy will be what you choose to build yourself. I could hear him breathing on the other end, long, uneven. We need to talk about this in person, he said eventually. We can, when I'm ready. And when will that be? I smiled softly. When I finish living my life. Then I hung up. That night, I walked along the Tiber River beneath string lights and flowering trees. I passed couples dancing to accordion music and old men playing cards under lamplight. I wasn't lonely. I was alive. The next day, Brooke called. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just asked in a voice so small I nearly didn't recognize it, Mom. Why didn't you talk to us before doing this? I was sitting on my hotel balcony, watching laundry flutter between buildings like flags. Did you talk to me before excluding me from the trip? I asked gently. Did you talk to me before planning to sell the house? I didn't know Fletcher had finalized it, she said. I thought we were just considering options. I believed that once too, I said, but the papers said otherwise. She didn't deny it. Where are you now? She asked. Rome, I said. Next week I go to Florence. Then maybe a small town in Tuscany. I haven't decided. There was a long pause. Then with something that sounded almost like fear, she asked, Are you coming back? I closed my eyes and inhaled the air sweet foreign mine. Eventually, I said, but not to Ferguson. Not to be anyone's responsibility. I'm thinking of living by the sea. Maybe even buying a little house. Silence. Then what about us? What about me? I said quietly. She cried. I didn't. I was done crying for people who forgot I had a soul. That night, I opened my travel journal and wrote something I hadn't written in years. I am not a burden. I am not a background character. I am a woman with a future. Howard would have smiled at that. I could almost hear him whispering back, Told you so. 2 weeks after Florence, I arrived on the coast. The train wound through Green Hills vineyards and sleepy little villages that looked like watercolor paintings. I leaned my head against the window, the rhythm of the track soothing in a way nothing else had been in years. My fingers played with the edge of the letter I kept in my purse. Howard's last letter, now soft and creased from being unfolded and refolded so many times, it felt like part of my skin. The town was called Portoino, a sleepy crescent of sun-bleached buildings wrapped around a rocky peninsula that jutted into the Mediterranean Sea. It wasn't on the tourist maps. That's what drew me to it. I'd booked a room at a guest house recommended by Beatrice, a widowed Englishwoman I'd met briefly in Florence. She'd overheard me talking to the hotel receptionist about looking for something quiet, away from the noise, where I can remember who I am. Beatrice had leaned in with a soft smile and said, I know just the place. And she was right. Casa Beatrice was a stone villa that smelled of lemons and lavender. It had ivy-covered walls, a terracotta courtyard, and an ancient olive tree that shaded a small patio where breakfast was served each morning. My room overlooked the sea. When I opened the shutters, sunlight poured in like honey. I stood at that window every morning with a cup of espresso and just listened to the waves, to the birds, to the sound of myself not being asked to do anything for anyone. In Portoino, I became something I hadn't been in decades, anonymous. No one called me Mom or Grandma or Martha, who always brings the pie. I was just a woman with kind eyes and a quiet voice who sat in cafes sketching buildings and smiling politely at strangers. I bought a wide-brimmed straw hat and a linen dress from the town seamstress. I went days without checking my phone. I slept 8 hours without dreams. And slowly, the weight of all I had carried began to fall from my shoulders like heavy coats I hadn't realized I was wearing in summer. Beatrice and I became friends in a way I hadn't known I needed. We shared wine and long conversations in a mix of English and halting Italian. She'd moved here 20 years ago, after the death of her husband Marco, an Italian sculptor. They thought I was mad, she told me one evening, as we watched the sun melt into the sea. My son in London, my sister in Bath, they thought I was grieving too hard. But I wasn't running away. I was choosing peace. Peace. I hadn't realized until then how little of it I'd known. When I told her the story about the house, the betrayal, the claws Howard had left me, she didn't gasp or frown. She simply nodded and said, "Good for you." Then she poured me another glass of wine. One morning, I walked down to the market and bought a newspaper I couldn't fully read. But there, tucked between articles, was a small advertisement for a seaside cottage Villa Sole. The name made me stop. The photo showed a simple white house perched on a cliff, a narrow path winding down to a secluded cove. There was a wrought iron gate, a small garden, and a terrace that seemed to float above the water. Something stirred inside me. I didn't need a house. I didn't plan to stay. But my feet were already moving, carrying me toward the address listed below. The agent was a man named Marco Gagliardi. Weathered, cheerful, with thick salt and pepper hair and a sharp mind. She was an English writer, he explained as we stood outside the iron gate. Passed away last year. Her children want to sell quickly. The place is in good shape, bones are strong. Needs love, that's all. He handed me the key and stepped aside. "I'll let you explore alone. It speaks better that way." The front door creaked as I opened it. Inside, silence and the scent of salt and old books. The house had 5 rooms, a sitting room with wide windows, a tiny kitchen with faded tiles, 2 small bedrooms, and a study lined with dusty bookshelves. The terrace at the back stopped my breath. It overlooked the sea completely, not just a sliver of it, all of it. Blue and endless. The kind of view you don't just look at, but step into. I walked out and leaned on the stone railing. The waves below whispered in a language I didn't yet speak, but somehow I understood. I closed my eyes. And I felt it. This was it. This was the place. Not just a house. A beginning. I bought Villa Sole that same week. The asking price was well below what I'd earned from the sale of my house in Ferguson. Even after legal fees and renovations, I'd have enough left to live comfortably for years. More than that, I'd have a home I chose. Not one I inherited, not one I kept out of guilt or tradition, but one that spoke my name. Fletcher texted a few days later. Just 4 words. "Are you ever coming back?" I didn't reply. Brooke's message came the next day. "The kids miss you. Lucas still talks about the swing in the backyard." That one made my chest ache. I responded simply, "I miss them too. They can visit." No threats, no guilt, just an invitation, one that respected my space. She didn't reply, and that was okay. As I scrubbed the old kitchen tile and filled the terrace pots with rosemary and basil, I began to feel something I hadn't in a long time. Not just peace, not just relief, pride. I had built a life for everyone else, Howard, Fletcher, Brooke, even the grandchildren. And now, for the first time since I could remember, I was building one for me. Some mornings at Villa Sole feel like they were borrowed from someone else's life. The sunlight reaches across the water, with a quiet gentleness brushing the terrace tiles warm before I've even brewed my tea. Birds sing without a schedule. Fishing boats move slowly through the bay like they've got nowhere in particular to be. And me. I sit at the little mosaic table, barefoot, sipping espresso with a splash of warm milk, and I don't check the time. After so many years of rushing, serving, remembering other people's schedules, I've stopped measuring my days in to-do lists. I measure them in wind, in taste, in softness. The renovation of the villa was nearly done. The local carpenter had finished building the bookshelves I ordered, and I filled them with English novels, sketch pads, and a few photo albums I brought from home. The walls were now a soft buttercream, the shutters freshly painted sea green, and the garden alive again, with herbs, wildflowers, and little clay pots, shaped like turtles, Beatrice's idea. "Your home should have humour," she'd said, placing one near the rosemary bush. "Otherwise, it just takes itself too seriously." She was right. I'd spent years in a house that had grown heavy with expectation and duty. This one felt light, honest, like it didn't need to prove anything. Neither did I. I hadn't heard from Fletcher again. No more messages, no calls. I imagined him sitting in his office at the insurance company, stewing in quiet frustration, trying to find a loophole in the paperwork Sheldon had drawn up. There wasn't one. Sheldon had confirmed it with satisfaction when we last spoke. "Your husband knew what he was doing, Martha," he'd said. That clause was ironclad. Your children never saw it coming, but I did. And Howard, he planned for them not to. I remembered Fletcher's voice on the phone after Tahoe, how he'd said the money was family money, as if I'd embezzled something instead of reclaiming what was mine. What no one ever told me about motherhood is how quickly you become public property. People forget you had dreams before their diapers, that your name isn't just Mom, that your opinions don't expire when you turn 60. A few nights later, I received a message from Brooke. It wasn't long, just a single text. Lily wants to send you a letter. What's your address? I stared at it for a long time, my heart a mix of hope and caution. I sent the address. 3 days later, I received a pale pink envelope postmarked from Missouri. In careful blocky handwriting across the front, Nonna Martha, with a backward N and a little heart over the A. Inside was a drawing of a swing hanging from a tree and a stick figure with wild grey hair pushing a smaller figure who wore a crown. Dear Nonna, I miss you. Can we come to your new house and eat spaghetti and see castles, Mommy says maybe? I love you. Lily. I cried over that letter. Not the kind of weeping that rips your chest open, but a quiet, grateful cry. The kind that waters new roots. I wrote her back that same day. Yes, sweet girl, you can come. There's a lemon tree and a big swing and pasta with your name on it. Bring your crown, I'll be waiting. I added a small postcard with a photo of the coast. The sea was shining in it like a storybook. That weekend, Beatrice hosted a dinner for a few locals and guests. She'd made her famous zuppa di fagioli and a pear tart that tasted like autumn wrapped in sugar. We ate under string lights on her terrace, the sea in the distance, laughter rising in little waves between clinks of glasses. There was an older French couple on a cycling tour, a quiet Swedish woman who painted sunsets, and an American professor researching Etruscan ruins. At one point, Beatrice turned to me and asked, "And what brought you here, Martha?" I paused spoon midair before answering. Loss, I said honestly, and then betrayal. But I stayed for the air. Everyone chuckled softly, but she understood. I could see it in her eyes. That night, after the guests had left, I stayed behind to help her wash dishes. We worked in companionable silence until she asked, "Do you think you'll ever go back to the States?" Maybe I said drying a glass. But not to live. I've given too many years to being who everyone else needed me to be. This is the first time I've chosen something for myself. She nodded. That's the hardest part, isn't it, choosing yourself without guilt? I looked out the window at the dark sea beyond. I don't feel guilty anymore, I said. I feel awake. A few days later, a letter came for me, not from Lily this time, but from Brooke. It wasn't handwritten. It was typed, neat, formal, but the words cracked in places. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what we did, what we didn't do. You were right, we forgot to see you as a person. We were scared, I think. Scared of change, scared of losing control, maybe even scared of how much we owe you. She wrote about the house, how she and Fletcher had argued about it, how she felt ashamed of being complicit. I don't blame you for doing what you did. I just wish we had talked more before everything snapped. And then this. The kids want to see you, not just Lily and Lucas. Me too, if you'll have us. I read that letter twice then, a third time, under the lemon tree in my garden. I didn't reply right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed to feel what I felt fully. Joy, hesitation, relief, and something else, something that finally tasted like respect. Maybe, just maybe, they were starting to see me again. Not as the mother who gave everything until she vanished, but as the woman who came back, whole, free, and finally unafraid to ask for more. I didn't sleep much that night. Brooke's letter sat folded on the table beside my bed, and every time I closed my eyes, my mind drifted back to one line, "If you'll have us." Such a simple phrase. But for someone who had once been treated like a dusty piece of furniture left in the corner, it carried the weight of 1,000 apologies. I wasn't angry, not anymore. Anger is loud and short-lived. What I felt now was quieter. It lived in my bones where disappointment had once settled, but now it was changing, evolving, into something like forgiveness, but not the kind of forgiveness that asks me to return to old roles or pretend the past didn't happen. This was the kind of forgiveness that builds a fence, leaves the gate open, but never removes the lock. The next morning, I walked down to the harbour with a sketch pad tucked under my arm. It had become a habit sitting on the stone bench near the boats, drawing whatever caught my eye, a mother and daughter sharing gelato, a fisherman mending nets, a black cat sleeping in the sun. That day I drew a swing. Not any swing, the swing. The one from our backyard. The one Howard installed with rope he triple-knotted just to be sure. The one where Brooke used to twist herself in circles until she was dizzy. The one Lily had fallen asleep on last summer, curled up like a kitten in the shade. I hadn't realized how much I missed them until I saw them on the page. That night, I sat at my desk in the little study at Villa Sole. I pulled out a piece of fine stationery I'd bought in Florence cream with a faint gold border and began to write. Dear Brooke, thank you for your letter. I've read it 3 times now. Each time it lands a little softer. I want you to know something I never wanted to disappear. I just needed to find the part of me that got buried under diapers, dance recitals, school lunches, retirement parties, and casseroles. I needed to remember the version of myself that dreamed of art of quiet of days without appointments. I think I've found her here. So yes, you may come. I would love to see you. But I'm not asking you to come out of obligation. I want you to come with respect. Not for what I was to you, but for who I am now. Villa Sole has enough space for all 3 of you. I'll pick up spaghetti lemons and a few surprises. Come see the life I built, not the life I was left with. Love, Mom. I mailed the letter the next morning and stopped by the bakery on the way home. The owner, a cheerful woman named Ilaria, greeted me with her usual warm grin. Preparing for guests, she asked, as I filled a small basket with soft rolls and fresh sfogliatelle. I smiled. Yes, my daughter and my grandchildren. Her eyes lit up. La familia finally. I nodded. Yes, but on my terms. The days passed quickly after that. I cleaned the guest room, made up the bed with fresh linens and sun-dried lavender sachets. I stocked the fridge with fruit and wine, and ingredients for Lily's favorite dish fettuccine with tomato cream sauce. I even found a small wooden swing at the Saturday market. It wasn't as sturdy as the old one Howard built, but it would do. I hung it from the olive tree in the corner of the garden just beyond the terrace, and then I waited. The night before they arrived, I walked out onto the terrace with a glass of wine and looked out at the sea. It was unusually calm. No crashing waves, just soft ripples licking the shore. The moon was high and round and golden, and I whispered, Howard, they're coming. I paused, then smiled. But I'm not afraid this time. Their taxi pulled up late the next afternoon. I watched from the window as Lily bounded out first, wearing a crown and dragging a pink suitcase twice her size. Brooke followed more slowly, holding Lucas's hand. He looked sleepy and shy, hiding halfway behind her leg. Brooke looked up toward the house and froze. I stepped out onto the stone steps, unsure what to expect. Hi, she said, her voice uncertain. Hi, I replied. Welcome to Villa Sole. Lily ran up the path, her arms open wide. Nonna. I bent down, caught her in my arms, and breathed her in grape juice shampoo and something purely her. You came, I whispered. You said spaghetti in a swing, she grinned. So, duh. I laughed, and the sound startled me. I hadn't laughed like that in years. Lucas walked toward me slowly. I crouched and opened my arms. Would you like a hug, sweetheart? He nodded and leaned in. Behind him, Brooke stood still, her eyes wide and wet. I walked to her, heart pounding. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. So I said the only thing that felt true. I'm glad you came. She nodded, wiping her cheek. So am I. That evening, we ate on the terrace. Pasta and wine and fresh bread from Ilaria. The kids devoured their plates. Brooke asked for seconds. We watched the sunset together, wrapped in shawls, our words soft but honest. Later, Brooke helped me with the dishes, and in the quiet of the kitchen she whispered, Thank you for letting us come. You didn't come because you had to, I said. You came because you wanted to. That's the difference now. She looked at me, really looked, and nodded. I see you now, she said. Not just as Mom, but as someone I wish I'd known sooner. I smiled, my throat tight. It's never too late. That night, I sat alone on the terrace after everyone had gone to bed. The sea shimmered in moonlight. The swing creaked faintly in the breeze, and I felt something rare and beautiful bloom inside me, a reunion not built on guilt, but on choice. It's strange how quietly life can change when you're no longer begging for it to. A week passed, and my little villa by the sea filled with the sound of children's feet, soft laughter over coffee, and stories retold at the dinner table. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand apologies or tearful reconciliations. But something in the air had shifted. Respect had entered the room, and it was sitting at the same table where once there had only been expectation. One morning, I woke to the sound of Lily's giggles in the garden. I pulled on a shawl and walked out to find her swinging her crown, crooked on her curls, the hem of her dress brushing against the lavender bushes. "Nonna," she shouted, "push me." I smiled and stepped behind her, placing my hands on the small of her back. As she flew forward, her hair catching the light like golden ribbon, I thought, this is enough. Not the house I left behind, not the one I sold, but this moment, this version of family. Simple, honest, undemanding. That afternoon, Brooke and I took a walk through the village, just the two of us. Lucas was napping, and Lily was helping Beatrice pick lemons. I offered Brooke a woven sun hat from the hallway hook, and she accepted it with a faint, grateful smile. We didn't talk for a while, just walked, down cobbled streets where cats lounged in windowsills, past shops with hand-painted signs, through a narrow lane that opened to a small square with a fountain shaped like a lion. Eventually, she broke the silence. "Do you hate us?" I turned to her, startled. "No," I said, "but there were days when I didn't recognize you." She looked away, biting her bottom lip. "I didn't recognize myself either," she said. "I became someone I didn't like." I nodded. I know the feeling. We sat down on the edge of the fountain, watching the water burble. "I was so tired all the time," Brooke said. "Between the twins, Nate's job trying to keep everything together. I started resenting you, not because you did anything wrong, but because you were always the strong one. And I didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like a failure." I reached over and placed my hand over hers. "You didn't have to be perfect," I said. "I would have understood tired. What hurt was being shut out." She nodded slowly. "We didn't mean to shut you out. We just forgot you were still building a life of your own. We thought yours had already happened." We talked until the sun began to dip, painting the walls golden. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to begin again. When we got back, Lily had set the table with little handwritten place cards. Nonna, Mommy, Lucas, me. Beatrice joined us that evening, bringing over roasted eggplant and a bottle of something sparkling. We ate under the grapevines. The candles flickered in the breeze. The swing creaked in the distance. I looked at Brooke and thought she's growing too, just as I am. Not into her mother, but into herself. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Brooke sat on the edge of the terrace while I tidied up. "I talked to Fletcher," she said softly. I paused. "He's not doing well with this." I exhaled and joined her, pouring 2 cups of mint tea. "I'm not surprised," I said. "He likes control. Losing it rattles him." She nodded. "He says you blindsided him, that you weaponized a legal clause against your own children." I laughed softly. "That's rich coming from someone who drafted a sale agreement behind my back." I told him that, Brooke said. He didn't take it well. I sipped my tea. "Does he want to talk?" She hesitated. "He wants to be heard, but I think he's still trying to figure out whether he's angry at you or at himself." I looked out at the dark sea, the horizon, a velvet line stitched with stars. "I'll talk to him," I said, "when he's ready to speak. Not to blame, but to listen." That night I stood in the mirror for a long time, not to fix my hair, not to apply makeup, just to look. The woman staring back wasn't the mother I used to be. She wasn't the one who hovered near casseroles and whispered, "I'm fine," even when she wasn't. She wasn't the widow who shrank into silence. She was someone else now, someone with salt in her hair and sun in her cheeks and softness in her eyes that came not from surrender but from strength. She was someone who'd chosen her life, and it showed. The next morning, Brooke surprised me. She made breakfast, a soft scramble with herbs from the garden, toasted bread with fresh jam, even coffee brewed, just the way I like it, strong with a dash of milk, not too hot. "I wanted to thank you," she said, setting the table, "for letting us come, for not slamming the door. I wasn't always sure I could keep it open," I admitted, "but I'm glad I did." She placed a small wrapped package in front of me. I blinked, confused. "Open it," she said. Inside was a tiny gold charm, a seashell, delicate and smooth. "For your bracelet," she said. "I know you haven't worn it in a while, but I thought maybe now you would." I held it in my palm, my chest tightening. "It's beautiful," I whispered. It's a beginning, she said. And it was. The next few days passed like a dream I hadn't dared hope for. We painted in the afternoons, took walks through olive groves, read books aloud under the tree. At night, after the kids went to sleep, Brooke and I talked about everything college grief dreams long buried. We started to see each other not just as family, but as women, with wants, with wounds, with worth. One night, as we watched the sun dip into the sea, Brooke turned to me and said, "You really like it here, don't you?" I nodded. "I think I was always meant to live by the sea." She smiled. "Then I'm glad you found your way home. Not to the house I gave up, but to the life I claimed." And this time I didn't ask for permission. I just became. I was trimming basil on the terrace when I heard the taxi doors slam shut. At first I thought it might be Beatrice returning from the market, or the postman dropping off another package of Lily's crayon masterpieces. But when I looked up, my heart stopped. Fletcher was standing at the gate, tall, stiff, uncomfortable in his business casual shirt that wilted under the Italian sun. He had a small suitcase in one hand, and in the other, a manila envelope tucked tightly against his chest like a shield. I didn't move right away, not out of anger, but because I needed to take in the sight of my son, the boy I once held through chicken pox and heartbreaks, now looking at me like he wasn't sure I'd let him in. He raised one hand in a hesitant wave. "Hi, Mom." I took a breath and walked down the steps toward him. We didn't hug. We didn't smile. I opened the gate and he stepped through like he was walking into a courtroom. "Nice place," he said, eyes scanning the garden. "Smells like something's cooking." "Brooke and the kids are at the market," I said. "They'll be back soon." He nodded as if that made this safer somehow. I led him inside and offered him water, which he accepted. He drank it in 2 gulps and set the glass down with a loud clink that betrayed how tightly he was wound. Then he pulled the envelope onto the table between us. "I brought the paperwork," he said. I blinked. "What paperwork?" He tapped the envelope. "Bank records. Proof of deposit. Timeline of the house transfer." I figured if we were going to have this conversation, it should be based on facts. "Ah, so we were still in lawyer mode." "Fletcher," I said gently, "I'm not contesting anything. I don't need records to remember what happened." He looked up startled. "You're not?" "No," I said. "Because this isn't about who signed what when. It's about what those signatures meant and what they didn't." He sat back in his chair, suddenly smaller than when he walked in. "I thought you were going to fight me," he muttered. "I already did," I said softly. "I just didn't do it with fists or fury. I did it with silence, with the sale, with my absence." He nodded slowly. That silence was loud. Good, I thought. It was supposed to be. We sat in quiet for a long moment, the only sound coming from the breeze rustling the olive branches and the soft creak of the swing outside. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Fletcher said finally. "I know that's probably hard to believe, but I didn't." "I believe you," I replied. "But I also believe you didn't think I mattered enough to tell." He looked like I'd slapped him. I didn't soften it. "I know you were trying to be practical. But what you really were," Fletcher was afraid. Afraid of dealing with an aging mother. Afraid of responsibility. Afraid that loving me might mean needing me. His lips parted, then closed again. "I wasn't afraid," he said at last. "I was overwhelmed and ashamed. You gave us everything, and when it came time to return the favor, I didn't want the hassle." There it was, the ugly truth. He looked away. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot," he added. "He'd be furious." "Not furious," I said. "Just disappointed, but not forever. He always believed people could find their way back." Fletcher swallowed hard. "I came here to see if I still had a place," he said, "in your life." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. "You do, but not in the way you used to." He furrowed his brow. "I'm not going back to being the woman who waits by the phone or cooks dinners you won't show up for. I'm not going to pretend this house, or this sea, or this freedom isn't mine. You can be part of my life, but you don't control the terms of it anymore." He nodded slowly, as if understanding for the first time what boundaries actually meant. "I brought you something," he said quietly, reaching into his bag. He handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a photograph, one I hadn't seen in years. Our old backyard. Howard at the grill. Me laughing at something just off camera. Fletcher and Brooke, mid-teens arms flung around each other, making silly faces. "We were happy once," he said. "I don't know where we lost that." I closed the box gently. We didn't lose it, I said. We just forgot where to look. That evening, we ate dinner as a family for the first time in years. Fletcher helped Brooke set the table. Lily insisted on sitting next to him and made him wear a paper crown she'd made earlier that day. Lucas watched him cautiously, then handed him a toy car in a quiet offering of trust. It wasn't perfect. There were pauses, glances, old wounds that hadn't fully scabbed over. But it was real. After dinner, Fletcher and I sat on the terrace while the others cleaned up. I don't know what happens next, he said, staring out at the sea. You don't have to, I replied. Not everything needs a plan. He laughed a small, surprised sound. That's not the mom I grew up with. No, I said. This mom wears linen and drinks wine and says no. He grinned. I think I like her. So do I. We sat in silence, watching the sun slide into the sea. This time, I didn't fill the silence with forgiveness, or expectations, or lessons. I let it be, because some silences aren't meant to punish. They're meant to hold space for growth. And he was growing, finally. I never imagined I'd build a home in a country where I didn't speak the language fluently, where I had no family history, no childhood memories, just the whisper of a dream my husband left me. And yet Villa Sole had become more than a house. It was proof that something beautiful could grow from betrayal. That a life could be rebuilt, not from revenge, but from intention. And that family didn't have to be restored to what it was, but could be reshaped into something new. That week, with both of my children under my roof, I saw glimpses of the people they had been before obligation and fear clouded their hearts. Fletcher softened around Lily, letting her braid his thinning hair with wildflower stems. He asked me for help in the kitchen, he who used to roll his eyes at the smell of garlic under his nose. Brooke watched the sea in the mornings like I did. She wrote in a journal something she hadn't done in years, and asked me one evening tentatively if I had any of Dad's letters left. I kept every one I said. They're yours if you want them. She cried in my arms that night, not because of regret, but because she finally felt safe enough to mourn what she'd never let herself feel the loss of time. On Friday morning, I hosted a small brunch for the neighbors. It was nothing fancy homemade focaccia, local fruit, strong coffee and laughter that bounced between the ivy-covered walls like it belonged there. Beatrice came with a bouquet of sunflowers. Ilaria brought fresh pastries. Marco, the real estate agent, even showed up tipping his hat to Fletcher with a grin. Fletcher, in turn, helped move chairs and practiced grazie mille with an accent so awful it made everyone laugh, himself included. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to explain my family. They weren't perfect, but neither was I. And in the cracks of our floors, something tender was blooming. Understanding. That afternoon, Brooke found me folding laundry in the guest room. She sat on the edge of the bed watching me quietly. I talked to Nate this morning, she said. I kept folding but glanced over. How's he doing? He misses us. The twins miss Lily and Lucas. But, she hesitated. He understands why I had to come. I nodded, laying a towel on the stack. She took a breath. I don't want to go back to how things were, Mom. Not with Nate, not with you, not with myself. I sat beside her, my hand still for once. Then don't, I said. She turned to me, tears welling in her eyes. It's hard. Changing. I squeezed her hand. Everything worth doing is. She smiled that small, honest smile I hadn't seen since she was 15. Do you regret anything, she asked. The sale, the fight, leaving everything behind. I paused, searching for the answer. I regret how long I stayed silent, I said. How long I tried to be small for other people's comfort. But what I did, no. I don't regret a second of it. She nodded, understanding me now in a way she never had before. I'm proud of you, she whispered. And I believed her. That evening, we all walked down to the shore. Fletcher skipped stones with Lucas. Brooke took photos of Lily doing cartwheels in the sand. I stood with my feet in the surf, the cool Mediterranean foam wrapping around my ankles like a blessing. Beatrice joined us later with a small bottle of wine and 4 plastic cups. To mothers who became women again, she toasted. To women who never stopped being mothers, I replied. We clinked plastic and drank under a coral sky. The waves whispered at our feet. As the sun disappeared, Fletcher walked up beside me. I've been thinking, he said, about your villa, about everything. Dangerous, I teased. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. You were right. About all of it. I didn't need to be right, I said. I just needed to be seen. He nodded. Well, I see you now. That silence again, the kind that healed. Then he added, when we go home, I want to talk to Sheldon about setting up something for you. A legal fund or a protection clause in your will. Not because I expect anything, just because I want to get it right this time. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a real one. I'd like that, I said softly. The next morning, they packed their bags. I helped Lily tie her shoes and tucked a sketchbook into her backpack, my own drawings of the sea of the villa of the olive tree swing. Don't forget me, I said playfully. She squeezed my arm. Nonna, you're unforgettable. Brooke kissed me on both cheeks. We'll be back. I know, I said, but don't come for me. She frowned. What do you mean? Come for yourself, I smiled. That's how it all began for me. Fletcher stood at the door, suitcase in hand. He looked around at the arched windows, the sunflowers on the table, the worn tile floor, where he'd once argued about money and walked out. He turned to me, his eyes softer now. You built something beautiful here, Mom. No, I said. I uncovered something that was always there. They left with the morning tide. I stood at the terrace, watching the car disappear around the bend. I wasn't sad. I was full of memory, full of hope, full of self. The woman who once needed permission now gave it only to herself. And in doing so, she found something better than forgiveness. She found peace. The day after my children left, I woke before sunrise and stood at the window of Villa Sole. It was still and quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't press but welcomes. The sea stretched endlessly before me, colored soft lavender and pewter under the dawn sky. A fishing boat bobbed gently on the horizon, its lantern flickering like a heartbeat. I pressed my fingertips to the cool glass and exhaled. Not a sigh, a release. This was the house I didn't know I needed. The life I thought I'd missed my chance at. The version of me I had buried so deep beneath obligation and fear, I wasn't sure she'd ever resurface. But here she was, standing barefoot at a window in Italy, breathing, whole. Later that morning, I walked into town to pick up fresh bread and herbs from the market. I waved to Beatrice as she haggled over tomatoes, kissed Ilaria on the cheek when she handed me a still-warm pastry, and laughed with Marco as he tried again to sell me a scooter I didn't want. No wheels for you, Signora, he teased. My feet work just fine, I replied, and they've taken me farther than I ever expected. He tipped his hat. Fair enough. But when you're ready for an adventure, you know where to find me. I grinned. Marco every day is an adventure now. That afternoon, I sat under the olive tree in my garden with a cup of tea and opened a small leather notebook. The same one Howard had gifted me on our 20th wedding anniversary, the one I'd barely used, afraid I didn't have anything important enough to say. But now the pages were filled, with sketches, with grocery lists, with pieces of my soul that had been too long neglected. And today I added one more thing. I am not who I was. I am not only who they remember. I am a woman with salt in her skin and fire in her bones. And I have finally come home to myself. Later, I walked to the post office to send Lily a package. Inside, 2 tiny seashells, a jar of dried lavender, and a note written on cream stationery with gold trim. Dear Lily, the swing is still here. I pushed it yesterday and thought of you. Next summer, when the breeze is warm and the flowers are blooming, you and Lucas can come help me plant strawberries. We'll make jam and draw mermaids. And maybe you can teach me how to cartwheel. Love, Nonna. That evening, I stood once more at the window, this time with a glass of red wine. The stars above the Ligurian coast glittered like spilled sugar. A soft wind lifted the linen curtains. Somewhere in the distance, a musician played an old Italian love song on the accordion, and I felt it again. That lightness, that sacred, unshakable knowing that I had done the hardest thing a woman like me could do. I had chosen myself, not in bitterness, not in rebellion, but in quiet, clear love. I know Fletcher will call again. I know Brooke will write, that Lily will send drawings, and Lucas will someday ask about the stories I haven't told them yet. I will be there, as I always was, but never again in the shadows of their lives. Only side by side, only if they knock with open hearts. I don't know where the road will go from here. Maybe I'll travel more. Maybe I'll learn to paint watercolors. Maybe I'll open a little corner cafe with Beatrice and serve Americans too afraid to order pasta properly. Or maybe I'll just sit here, on this land, in this home, with the ghosts that no longer haunt but protect, with the woman I buried long ago now, breathing, smiling, singing along to music I didn't even understand but finally felt. As the moon rose, I whispered one last thing to the night sky. Not to Howard, not to my children, but to the version of me that once trembled in the kitchen, holding betrayal in her hands, and wondering where it had all gone wrong. I whispered, "You didn't lose everything. You found yourself. And that was worth it all." And with that, I turned off the light, left the window open, and let the wind carry the rest.